Okay, I am going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for joining for our presentation today. And we're going to be talking about something that I really love to work on, which is the workflow piece as it relates to SharePoint. And we're going to talk about different ways to do that and do some comparison and explain how we can use some different tools to be effective in doing that. Before we jump into our topic, I just want to do some high-level overview, give some basic ground rules for today, that kind of thing. First, I'll just give you a little bit of background. I am a SharePoint solutions developer, and I also do a lot of work around the Microsoft platforms, especially including Power Apps and Power Automate, which is part of our presentation today. And I work with a lot of different kinds of customers, focusing primarily on SharePoint. I was an InfoWise customer long ago and came to really get a lot of benefit and use their tools a lot. And so I now work with their team, and I really try to do the best that I can to help others to see how these tools can really help you to easily build solutions. So that's about my background. I do really love these tools just because it makes your work really easy, and I think that's important. Our Ultimate Form software, it is a full form solution inclusive of workflow, which is what we're going to talk about today. And these tools do deploy completely inside of the SharePoint environment. And a little bit later, I'll talk about how you can try those out if you're new to those tools. If you stick around towards the end of our presentation, we'll be giving away a shirt that is for people in US only, just because of shipping costs, that type of thing. So be sure to hang around for that. If you do have questions, we absolutely want to hear them. The way to give those to us is using the GoToWebinar interface. Just enter your questions in the chat using the questions tool. I do have team members on with me right now. They'll help out with that. And if there's anything we don't cover during the presentation, please let us know. We do want to talk to you. You can email us at sales@infowisesolutions.com. And another great thing to do is to sign up for a demo presentation, and you can do that also from the InfoWise website. All right, so that's kind of the ground rules, and so now we can start to dig in. All right, so focus today is on workflow, and what we're doing is talking about two possible options for you. So Power Automate is Microsoft's platform. It's part of Office 365. Up until about 4 months ago, it was known as Flow. The processes that you build in Power Automate are referred to as flows. And then in our product, we have Ultimate Forms Actions. This is a comprehensive set of actions that lets you automate just about anything that you would otherwise have to do manually as a user in SharePoint. So just kind of to run down some high-level comparison between these different tool sets. For Power Automate, predominantly this is geared for SharePoint Online, although you can use it with a on-premises data gateway connector. Ultimate Forms Actions were originally designed and built for on-premise SharePoint, and then they were completely converted over for online. So it's applicable and easily usable in both kinds of environments. In terms of the number of executions and that type of thing, there are different license levels tied to Power Automate. I won't delve into the specifics on that, but you can, of course, look that up and get information. If you are using the Ultimate Forms action, that is unlimited. The only exception to that is obviously there are some limits that have to do with throttling. If you try to do something, for example, execute an action, thousands of times in the course of a few minutes, you're going to run into throttling issues. And that's really true in any kind of SharePoint environment. And that type of limit is effective for any kind of environment. So there's some strategy as it relates to workflow. You have to be aware of a situation like that where you unintentionally are triggering an excessive volume of actions all at one time. Generally speaking, Having spent a lot of time in both interfaces, I really don't think I'm biased in telling you that predominantly Power Automate is a developer-oriented environment. And particularly, I say this because there are very often situations where you do need to do coding, and it requires kind of an analytical process and troubleshooting. Now, that's not to say that if you're not a developer, you shouldn't try to use these tools. I definitely think that you should, but there is a learning curve, and it does take some time to acclimate yourself and train on that, and it's just important to understand what you're getting into. And I would really see the same for Power Apps, which is a form building tool, same type of situation. Generally speaking, that's a developer-oriented tool set. In comparison with Ultimate Forms Actions, you don't need to use code in just about all cases. There are some rare exceptions where you would invoke a simple function call, but in general terms, it's user interface driven, and you can control and configure through basic settings. So you don't really have to be a developer or do programming when using the Ultimate Forms Actions. Power Automate does include a lot of connectors to other platforms. So it's, in some ways, you could say it's a tool set that's geared around automation connected to all kinds of different web platforms, including SharePoint. In general terms, the Ultimate Forms Actions are focused on the SharePoint automation. There are things you can do, such as calling out to web services and things like that. But part of what I'll show you in the presentation today is that you could really combine these two to get the benefits of both. In general terms, I would say that the Ultimate Forms Actions are extremely good at automation of any type of activity within SharePoint. Power Automate, in contrast, does include good connectors with SharePoint, but that story is still evolving, and there's some shortfalls as it relates to that. So one thing to consider is that Power Automate is a relatively new platform, whereas in comparison, the Ultimate Forms Actions have been around and being refined and developed over a course of more than 15 years. So based on that, you can expect that we're going to have a more robust platform in terms of overall capabilities. In terms of learning how to use these, generally speaking, Power Automate is something that you learn through practice and experience, and that's kind of a trial and error situation. In Ultimate Forms, we do provide many tutorials with step-by-step examples, and we do have training to help you ramp up and learn on that. In both cases, these can be combined, and that's the part that's really the thrust of my main presentation today, and which is very interesting and powerful to me. Basically, I can take the tool sets of both, combine them together, and it's perfectly reasonable and beneficial to take advantage of that. So that's kind of the best possible scenario for you, is to actually take advantage of both of these tool sets if you can. Okay, so let's just talk about strategy as it relates to workflow and working with SharePoint. Generally speaking, we want to get something set up quickly that we can interact with and test out. So I really do subscribe to the minimum viable product idea, just meaning get the basic structure of what you want to build set up quickly so you can troubleshoot and make your adjustments based on the results that you see. So we want to be able to move quickly. We want to get workflows up fast. We don't want to get stuck trying to troubleshoot and understand what we're doing. We want to have basic functionality without doing code, and we want to keep things in bite-sized pieces. We want to be able to test, and we also want to track and monitor as we execute that workflow. All right, so this is kind of how I think about things as it relates to building solutions. Generally, with the Ultimate Forms tool sets, it's real straightforward. With your out-of-the-box tools, it can be a bit cryptic and frustrating, and just kind of a visual representation of how I think about things. Our product and tools is available. I just want to reiterate that it is available for SharePoint Online and for on-premise. Okay, so generally speaking, as it relates to working on workflow, the way that you do this is you're going to make some adjustments to it and publish the workflow, and tested it out. Now, with InfoWise, you're just saving your actions. With Power Automate, you do actually publish it out. But basically, it's a trial and error approach where you make incremental adjustments, test it out to see if it works, and then continue to tweak. It's a cycle that you're going through. All right, so we're going to jump into it. Enough of those PowerPoint slides. Let's jump right into SharePoint Online, and we can actually take a look, and we're going to execute some of these processes. Now, I'm talking really to two audiences right now. What I'm wanting to do is address users who may have some experience and are using Power Automate. And if that's who you are, if I'm describing you, then I'm sure you can relate to what I'm describing, where there's very exciting things about Power Automate. There's things you've been able to automate, and there's things about those tools you like. And I expect there's things about it that you don't like, that are a bit frustrating, a bit limited, aspects of the platform where it's kind of quote unquote not quite there yet. So the InfoWise Ultimate Forms Actions can be a great benefit to you in that you would be able to combine and use things that are very developed, and it really fills in the gaps and helps you do things a lot more easily. For the Ultimate Forms Actions audience, what I would say is, our tool set is great and you can automate everything, but adding and learning how to use Power Automate in addition to and in combination with is really going to open up some more possibilities, potentially, especially to, evolve other things. So I'm going to actually go through some settings, and we'll do some compare and contrast to talk about how these two things relate. So what I'm going to do, I've got this list that I've set up, which you can see on my screen for projects. This is a basic project tracking tool that I've made. And first, we're going to take a look at how actions are configured and set up from the Ultimate Forms Actions perspective. And once you have this installed in your SharePoint environment, you just click on a button that's right there immediately visible from your list, and this takes you to a dashboard. And with Ultimate Forms, it is a comprehensive tool set. First and foremost, it's a form building tool, but also includes a lot of robust features and functionalities, and the actions are what we're focusing on today. Now, in our actions interface, what you're going to see is a sequence of any actions that you set up, and these are just configured using a wizard-style interface where you work through tabs and just apply basic settings. And in my example solution, I really only just needed a few things, which are generally pretty easy to set up. So we're going to review some of that. Now, I mentioned the fact that Ultimate Forms Actions really comprehensively cover automating all of the different kinds of things that you would want to do in your SharePoint environment. So if you look down this list, you see a list of maybe 15 or something options right here, and there's a lot of versatility. And basically, you're going to define a trigger condition, and whenever that condition is met, it will execute whatever you set up in these. But you can see in here, just even beyond the basics of updating and creating list items, you can actually do things like automate the creation of SharePoint sites. You can control permissions on records or lists based on trigger conditions. You can have printouts created. Many different things you can do. As I say, I think of this really as a comprehensive tool set to cover automation in SharePoint. We're going to take a look at a specific example of one of the actions I have set up here. So in this case, I needed some automation because I want to do actually a PDF printout. This is not a capability that exists in SharePoint or in Power Automate unless you use a third-party connector to do that, be what you call like a premium service in that. The way that you do this in InfoWise, basically once you've selected that, as I mentioned, you need a trigger condition. So I do have a field I set up. It's just called email PDF. And what I'm listening for is when that is going to change over and set to yes. And what I'm able to do is put in some basic configuration to pick the template through a drop-down picker. And then it asks me the format, that's PDF. And then I can say who I want that email to go to. And then I can do email body and subject and things like that. And the thing that I want you to notice about this screen is that there are no code snippets or programming or anything like that involved. It's just basic drop-down menus where I pick whatever applicable option, and everything's done in a very intuitive manner. I don't have to do any special formatting or anything like that. So it's a basic if this, then that situation. So if this field changes and after the change it's yes, then I want it to do this thing, which is in this case to email a PDF of this project data. Okay, so that's one example. Let me cancel out of that one. If I just want to do something like update some basic SharePoint fields, that's extremely straightforward. In this case, it's something I want to execute every time. Notice we have the run on event. So this is checking whether it's the new or edit form or which form I'm in. I also have options if I want to do timer based. I can have that recurring. I could have it happen as often as every hour, or I could have it on a weekly basis. So that's another possibility. It doesn't just have to be based on user triggered events. And in an update type of action, basically all I have to do is use this drop-down picker, click my field, it shows me the fields in the list, and then I can just set my value. And it's really just that easy. So easy to understand, easy to set up, basic concepts. So, and also what is really important is I can do it fast. Some folks might remember the old days, we used to have to use SharePoint Designer to do what I would call classic SharePoint workflow. It was really cryptic. You had to go through many layers of menus. You had to use a desktop tool to do it. Really bad user experience. And of course, that's been deprecated. There has been no new version of SharePoint Designer, nor will there be since SharePoint Designer 2013, which is a very long time ago. So really we are evolving and using different tools these days. Okay, so that's the actions interface, and that's where you set things up. I should mention in passing that we do have a really excellent form designer tool. It lets you control the look and feel of your form. You can use the drag and drop interface. Just very easy and elegant to set up. And of course, we have a lot of presentations and information on that, but I do want to stay on focus for what I'm doing today. And I'm going to get into my form. I'm going to perform some actions in a minute, and I have some buttons for that. We're going to actually get to go through that. Before I do, in fairness, what I want to do is actually come over to the Power Automate interface and talk a little bit about how that works, how you create things, that type of thing. When you're in your Power Automate, it's basically you're logged in just the same way through SharePoint Online as you would for your SharePoint Online site, and you can create flows. And workflow principles are the same, right? I need a trigger condition, and based on a trigger, I'm going to do whatever actions that I need to do. We're going to take a look at a particular one that I have set up, and this is for requesting approval. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the interface, the Canvas interface that you use when you're building flows in Power Automate. Okay, so I have one in particular for this projects list I have, and just as is the case with InfoWise Actions, I'm listening for a particular change. Now in this case, I'm actually having a link to trigger this from a button inside SharePoint, but I could have it on change. I could have it for any number of different conditions. And basically what I want to do is get this particular item, and then I can use that reference for other parts of this. Okay. This is a particular example of something that I like in Power Automate. It's called Send Email with Options. And what this is doing is it allows me to send out an email and give the user a couple of things they can click on in the email, and I can get a trigger to update SharePoint. So when you put things in here, you're going to notice that in some cases I have drop-down pickers and I have a visual interface. Sometimes I don't. So basically I have, in this case, I have a condition. What I'm doing is checking to see, what the user has responded to in the email. So what's interesting about this is I don't even necessarily have to have the user click to respond inside of SharePoint. So you can all imagine scenarios where you have like a VP or somebody like that, and if you can get them to just do one mouse click, that's great. You're trying to make it really streamlined easy. So all I'm really trying to do is convert one field, and I'll just show you an example of something where things can get a little bit hairy in Power Automate. You can do it, but it involves a little coding and programming, that type of thing. An example is working with time. In this case, really, I'm trying to write back a message into the SharePoint interface. And in order for that to work correctly, you can get the current time, but it gets it at a UTC value. And what you have to do is convert that over into local time zone, and then you even have to do things like tell it the exact format to output. So it's requires a lot of precision, and you have to make a lot of explicit directions to tell it just exactly what to do. So what usually happens is when you first put this in, it spits out all this date and time information that looks kind of ugly, and then you have to circle back and polish it and figure out how to format it to get it the way you want. And that's a typical kind of experience when you're working with this. But generally speaking, you work within this interface and you save, and then what you can do is you can check your executions and that type of thing. So that's kind of generally working in Power Automate. It's really important to me, the concept of being open and adopting use of all tools. This is Microsoft's platform. They will be committed to this and continue to make updates to that. That being said, I expect it's going to continue to be a developer-oriented experience, and there's always going to be some things about that could be somewhat limited. But there are advantages, and there are things that I can do from within Power Automate that may not be covered in InfoWise Actions. And likewise, in InfoWise Actions have things and abilities there that are going to be a lot easier, or it's going to cover functionality not covered in Power Automate. But these tools don't in any way interfere with each other. They complement each other. If you think about it, these are all based on trigger conditions, and I can set up my trigger from either environment. These don't interfere with each other in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to actually come back to my tool, and I'm going to give you some examples of things that I can do. Now, you'll notice in SharePoint Online that we have some toolbars and things like that. So, for example, you're going to see the flow, and it will do things like show your flows and things like that in there. But I can also do things like with column formatting, where I can show a link and that type of thing. So let's just do a quick example. And I just want to show the user experience if I want to do that type of action. So if I trigger a flow from SharePoint Online, it's going to open up this side panel. And then in this case, what I've done is just reference my flow ID. I've got a little progress area. And what I'm doing here is I've created a flow that just does a simple update, but I'm also using this conjunction with my InfoWise Actions. Recall that I had mentioned there is no out-of-the-box capabilities for PDFs with Power Automate or anything like that, but InfoWise has a really excellent tool set to do that. So I can trigger and set up a PDF functionality. I'll just kind of show you what I get in my email. All right, so that's what it looks like. I just get an automated email. If you remember, the action I showed you is looking for a change in that field. So my flow actually was set up just to switch the field value, and then on InfoWise, it was listening for that change. Now, onChange is a perfect example of something where InfoWise Actions handles this well, but Power Automate unfortunately does not. There is no onChange function yet in Power Automate. You can use an action with Power Automate to listen for when an item's modified, but that's going to execute every single time an item's modified. Now I can do a condition for an if block to catch a condition in that, but nevertheless, that's going to count as an execution of a flow, And if you're doing something like updating all those records in the list, you could have a lot of what I would call false triggers where it automates that. So that's not great. I'll just show you, here's our PDF output. Basically I've got a template tool from within InfoWise. If I go to design, I can quickly and easily set up print templates, and it's just referencing that template. So if I go in here, I just pick the fields. So mention this is all drop-down pickers, that type of thing. I can do things like reorder that and just apply some basic settings. In this case, I wanted to have a nice header at the top, that type of thing. I just set up that template and I can reference that from what I'm doing. Okay, so that's an example of something I can set up. If I want to just email summary results, I can do that by clicking on this. Now I will show you real quick, I am doing a little bit of a trick here to make these links show up. This is using column formatting. And the way this is done is you can reference the flow ID, and then you give it some other things to tell it the color and the symbol, that type of thing. But nevertheless, if you want to just use out of the box, you can just go to the flow menu and you can browse for your flows that way as well. Another one here, I just have a link. I want the user to be able to click update history, and I want to trigger an action with InfoWise. So that was one of my actions. So I'm going to go ahead and do that one. And you can see it's just opening up a panel. But what I'm doing here is I'm making this work with InfoWise. So all it's doing is triggering a yes/no field to yes, and then in InfoWise, I'll come back here. I'll show you that when that value changes, then I'm executing my action. So the reason I'm wanting to do it this way is because the code and extra work I have to do in Power Automate is quite a lot more than what I have to do in InfoWise. So basically, I let InfoWise do the heavy lifting because it's faster for me to set up. Now, I do some basic HTML formatting just to make my history look nice, but essentially, my flow is tripping the update history flag to yes whenever the user clicks on that button, and then InfoWise is listening, and it knows when that turns to yes to go ahead and execute this action. I'll show you exactly what that does. If you look at the history for this, I'll go ahead and go in my Apples project. I'm updating, and you can see I've got my 1127. It's giving me the status and some notes in there, and it's updating the history. So that's what that action did, and that was all just based on a trigger in here. And if you have you can also have actions like this with InfoWise. If you want to do triggers like that, we do have a manual execution option, and you can trigger that from the InfoWise interface as well. I'm going to show one last example. This is the one I showed you from the developer side, but you haven't actually seen it from the user experience side. This is the email with options, if you remember that. So this is triggering that. The idea here is if you have an approval process that you want to do, you can have that work through an email, and then use that hand in hand with InfoWise action. So if I go into my email, let me pause my screen sharing for a second. All right, I'm just getting it open, bear with me. Okay, there we go. This is what Flow sends. So this is kind of cool. Now, InfoWise does have an email import capability, which it can have a listener and it can respond to certain keywords and things like that. But it can be a little bit tricky to set up that type of functionality, whereas this particular function is a really nice one. So when I click approved, if you remember, I had a branching logic in there. So that will go ahead and trigger that. And what I'm going to have happen is I'm going to make an update that will be caught, and it will update in our SharePoint list. So the email with options is a cool thing that I might like to use hand in hand with InfoWise. And what that does is if I go into my project, Will Cooper approved on March 20, it basically writes that in there. And if I didn't approve, then I'd have another branch there that would handle that condition. So that's an example of something where I'm able to kind of tap into something extra that might not be too easy for me to do, just only using InfoWise actions. Okay, so let me kind of talk about next steps, and we're going to do that short drawing here in just a minute. The most important thing that you can take away from our presentation today is if you don't have Ultimate Forms, you want to try this out. You can try some of the things I'm talking about. And luckily, it's really easy to do. If you go to our quick start area, you're going to want to go to the installation, and it'll tell you just exactly how to download a trial. The cool thing is our trial is the full software. There's no limits on that in any way. So there's a nice video that shows you what to do. In Office 365, you can download the app and just watch the video and help. If you do need help on that, send us a note, let us know, we'll help you out. We don't want you guys to get held up in any way. And I did mention tutorials. We do have really good instructions on that. So if you look in the actions section, really we have great examples of just about any type of action that you would want to set up. If you're kind of scratching your head or wondering more about what Ultimate Forms is, you feel like you want to have a more depth and personal information about that, just go to our homepage and click Request a Demo. There's just a short little form, you fill that out, then we'll get your notice. We'll contact you, we'll set up a web meeting, and we can talk to you one-on-one. So, you can talk to us about the project or needs of your business, and we'll lend a hand. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to show today. What I would like to do right now is give it a shirt. So in the questions interface, if you want to right now, just give me a number 1 to 100, and I'll go ahead and pick out a winner in about 15 seconds. Yeah, I am recording our meeting. I will post it on YouTube later. I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. All right, in about 10 seconds, give you just a little bit more time. All right. We'll say, okay, Jamie Soto, you're the winner. What I'd like you to do is send me an email with your address and shirt size, and you can email me at willc@infowisesolutions.com, and that's .com. That's WILLC at infowisesolutions.com. All right. That takes care of that. That pretty much covers what we're going to talk about in our presentation today. If you guys have any questions, reach out to us. We definitely want to follow up and talk to you guys. There's all kinds of really awesome, cool automation you can do. And my hope is that you have some ideas and you're thinking about how to possibly use both of these. So InfoWise folks, if you haven't used Power Automate, it's a good time to try to learn some basics there. And Power Automate folks, if you don't have InfoWise actions, you really expand your capabilities and tap into a lot of stuff that you can't do today with your out of the box. All right, well, thanks again, everybody, for attending. And I look forward to your feedback, and we will post our presentation later today. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.